Today we're going to start learning about how to draw gems and jewels. What I realized when I started making this video was that I had a lot of options that I wanted to give you, a lot of possibilities, and it ended up being a lot of information. So as I've been editing, what I realized was it would work best in 3 parts. So this is just part 1 of a 3-part series on how to draw gems and jewels. This is part 1. We're just going to think about how to draw the outlines of some of the options of gems and jewels. Part 2 is going to be coloring them in a way that gives them some form or that like 3D-ness. And finally, there is another type of jewel that is round. It looks more like a Mancala stone than like a diamond or an emerald. And that's part 3 is beginning to end, how to draw and color those round jewels. There really are a million different ways to approach drawing and coloring gems and jewels. You may have seen tutorials before that maybe do it in a way that you really like. Maybe you've been successful in trying this before. But I'm going to share with you some of the ways that I really like, the ways that I find to be the easiest. But if you have a different way that really works for you, please send me your pictures, tell me all about it, because I'm always looking for easier ways to do or explain how to make different things. In any case, let's get started by looking at some of our supplies for the drawing stage of making these gems and jewels. To draw our gems, we will definitely need a pencil and some paper. Keep in mind that what kind of paper you choose will affect what options you'll have for coloring. If you want to do marker painting, make sure that you use a heavier paper to draw on. If you have a ruler, that could be very helpful for this. And of course, we want to have a pen, a Sharpie, or a crayon nearby. Although I would recommend waiting to trace until after you've watched part 2. The best place to start is a simple square. It's classic and straightforward. To get started, we're just going to draw 2 squares. One square inside the other square. The inside square is the face of the gem, and the space in between those 2 squares is the edge that angles down from the face on each side. On this one, I used graph paper to make sure that that edge was even all the way around. The last step is to connect the inside square corners to the outside square corners. That's really all it takes to make a simple gem, but there are millions of types of gems and jewels out there, and this is just a good place to start. You can also experiment with color, which I'll show you in part 2 of this video series. One easy upgrade you can make to your jewels is to bevel the corners. On a real gem, these corners would have been cut on an angle so they slope down away from the face. Even though ours is flat, we can make it look that way by cutting off the corners. If you don't have graph paper, the easiest way to make a square gem with an even border is to start with a square piece of paper. The first thing you're going to do is connect the corners with a ruler to make a big X. Then you're going to measure 2 distances from the center on each branch of that line. Here I did 2.5 inches from the center and 1.5 inches from the center. 2.5 inches will be how wide and tall my whole gem is, and 1.5 inches will be how wide and tall the face of my gem is. Once you're done marking, you're just going to connect the dots to make 2 squares, one inside the other, just like we did on the graph paper. If you're just trying to make a simple square without graph paper, you can stop here and erase that X in the center. If you're trying to bevel your corners, we're just going to chop off a little bit of each corner. If you want to be picky, it should be about a 45-degree angle, but I wouldn't stress about it. Last but not least, you're going to connect the inside and outside squares with little triangles. Make sure to decide how you want to color your gem before you trace. Sharpie looks great with colored pencil, but for painting with markers, you might want to opt for a crayon instead. When it's time, make sure to trace the outside and inside squares and the triangles at the corners, but don't trace that X in the middle or the points we're trying to cut off from the outside square. As always, we're going to erase those extra pencil lines and then you'll be ready to color. Another variation of this simple gem is the beveled rectangle. Of course, for this one, we want to start with a rectangle and then draw a smaller rectangle inside. To do that evenly, first decide how wide you want that edge to be. For example, I decided I wanted a ½ inch of space in between the inside and outside rectangles. So I made 2 little dots a ½ inch in from each of the sides. Once I connected the dots, I had a perfect rectangle that was a ½ inch in on every side. Just like before, we're going to cut off a little bit of the corner to make a bevel. If we want to get really fancy, we can turn this into a double bevel, which I'll show you in a second. The single bevel is exactly what we did before. We connected the inside pointed corners to the outside flat corners with little triangles. When it's all colored, the single bevel should look a bit like this. The other option is what I like to call a double bevel. For a double bevel, we're going to cut off the inside square corners too, making sure not to cut off too much. We just want to trim a little bit. We still have to connect the corners, but instead of a pointed corner to a flat corner, we're connecting a flat corner to a flat corner. Just like before, when you've decided how you're going to color it in, you can trace with Sharpie or pen or crayon, depending on which technique you'd like to use. Between starting with different shapes, using different colors, and different coloring techniques, there are endless possibilities to what kinds of gems you can create. Come back for part 2, where I'll go over how to color in your gems with colored pencils or by marker painting. And then in part 3, we'll go over how to make these really cool round gemstones.